Some of the Harley tricks I'm about to show you could fail an emissions inspection, void your warranty, or even be illegal on public roads. But they're also the kind of workshop shortcuts that can save riders thousands in unnecessary repairs. After 20 years of wrenching on Harleys, I've seen simple fixes turn into four-figure dealership bills. Today, I'm breaking down the modifications and maintenance tricks most owners never hear about. Number 20. The TSSM Idle Relearn. Every Harley since 2007 runs a turn signal security module that also babysits your idle behavior. It watches how you ride, how hard you crack the throttle, how long you sit at stoplights, and it quietly adjusts idle target speed based on those habits. Ride timid for a few weeks, and the module starts defaulting to a lazy, hunting idle, even after a fresh tune-up. Dealers charge $60 to $90 to run a relearn on their diagnostic tool. You don't need their tool. Key on, don't start the bike, let the security light finish its cycle, then turn the key off. Do this 3 times in a row with 30 seconds between cycles. On the third cycle, start the bike and let it idle for 2 full minutes without touching the throttle. That forces a fresh idle relearn without a scan tool anywhere near your bike. I did this on a customer's 2019 Road King last month that idled like it had a vacuum leak, ran smooth inside of 5 minutes, and there was never a leak to begin with. Worth knowing, the relearn resets more than idle behavior. It also clears the module's stored throttle response habits. So if your bike has felt sluggish off the line since you bought it used, this same procedure is usually the actual fix, not a new throttle body. This next one answers an important question. Number 19. The Screamin' Eagle backplate swap without the Screamin' Eagle price tag. Stock air cleaner backplates on twin cam and Milwaukee 8 motors have a restrictive velocity stack cast right into them. Harley sells a high-flow backplate for around $90. That's really just a machined-out version of the stock piece with a bigger bore. A machine shop will open up your factory backplate on a lathe for $20. Same bore diameter, same result. The air simply has more room to move before it hits the throttle body, which matters most at higher RPM, where the stock casting starts choking flow. Paired with an open element filter, riders typically pick up a noticeable pull higher in the rev range that the stock setup can't deliver. It's not a huge number on paper, but combined with a fuel adjustment, it's a real, repeatable gain, not a placebo. Here's the honest limitation. This modification does nothing for you below about 3,000 RPM, so if most of your riding is slow-speed cruising through town, save your $20, the gain only shows up when you're actually spinning the motor. Another case makes this even clearer. Number 18. The Compensator sprocket grease starvation fix. Nobody checks their compensating sprocket until it's screaming at idle. That sprocket absorbs every driveline shock from the primary chain, and it runs almost dry from the factory because Harley uses a minimal grease pack to keep production costs down. Around 20,000 miles, it starts groaning, especially cold. The trick mechanics don't advertise. Pull the derby cover, back off the compensator nut, and pack it with a moly-based chain lube instead of standard grease. Moly handles the shock loading far better and doesn't fling off the way lighter greases do. It's a 45-minute job that eliminates a noise dealers will often diagnose as a full primary chain replacement, a repair that runs $800 or more. And here's the strange part most riders never realize. The noise almost always shows up first on cold mornings and disappears once the engine warms up, because the moly film thins with heat and starts doing its job. If your groan vanishes after 2 minutes of riding, that's your confirmation before you even pull the derby cover. The next one changed the conversation. Number 17. The O2 sensor bung block. If you've deleted your catalytic converter or gone to a full open exhaust, your factory oxygen sensors will throw the bike into a permanent rich running limp mode. The ECU thinks the cat has failed. Riders quietly solve this with small stainless bungs that thread into the header in place of the sensor, or with resistor-equipped sensor simulators that trick the ECU into reading a healthy signal. I'll be straight with you. Running without functional O2 feedback means your fuel mixture is no longer self-correcting for altitude or temperature, so this only works well paired with a proper tune. Also worth saying clearly, Deleting cats and O2 monitoring is illegal for street use under the Clean Air Act in every state, and states with visual or OBD emissions testing will fail you on the spot. Try this instead if you're on the fence. A high-flow catalytic converter, rather than a full delete, keeps you emissions legal in most states while still opening up flow noticeably over the restrictive factory unit, and it doesn't trigger the limp mode fault at all. That opened the door to something else. Number 16, the cam chain tensioner shoe check you can do in your driveway. Twin cam engines built before 2011 are famous for tensioner shoe failure, and Harley's own service bulletin admits it. The underground trick isn't a repair, it's a 5-minute early warning check most riders never learn. Pull the timing plug on the right side of the cam cover, bump the engine over by hand using the rear wheel in gear with the plugs out, and watch for excess play or a grinding feel through the chain. Catching worn tensioner shoes before they shed rubber into your oil pump saves you from a full engine teardown. I've seen that repair quoted at $3,800. I've seen this 5-minute check catch it 2,000 miles early for free. And here's the strange part about this failure mode. It almost always announces itself with a faint rattle specifically on cold startup that quiets down within 30 seconds. Riders dismiss it as normal lifter noise for months before the shoes actually let go. The next one is particularly interesting. Number 15. The Vance & Hines Fuel Pack Self-Tune Shortcut. Most riders buy a fuel pack, run the auto-tune wizard once, and never touch it again, leaving real power on the table. The auto-tune sequence actually improves the longer you let it run through varied riding, not just one highway pull. Enable auto-tune, then deliberately ride a mix of hard acceleration, steady cruising, and stop-and-go city riding over about 50 miles before locking the map. This exposes the closed-loop learning to the full range of conditions it needs to build an accurate fuel table, instead of a map tuned entirely around one type of riding. Riders who do this properly report noticeably crisper throttle response than the one-pull default map most dealers leave installed. Honest limitation here. Auto-tune only corrects fuel trims within a limited range. If your exhaust and air cleaner combination is dramatically more open than stock, you'll still want a base map loaded first. So auto-tune is fine-tuning from a reasonable starting point instead of fighting a wildly wrong baseline. Here's something else worth knowing.
Before we continue, there's a reason most of this is knowledge a dealership would rather bill you for by the hour. The complete field archive goes where this channel can't. The full playbook, uncut. The habits that keep a bike on the road for decades, and the thousands they save you. The code on your screen gets you in. Scan it, and let's get back to the bike.
Number 14. The clutch cable free play trick nobody adjusts correctly. Factory clutch free play specs on cable clutch Harleys are set conservative from the factory, around 1/8 to 3/16 of an inch at the lever. That extra slack is why so many riders fight a grabby, hard-to-modulate clutch at low speed. Tightening the adjuster at the hand lever, not the primary side, down to a firmer 1/16 inch of free play gives dramatically more feel and modulation without changing clutch engagement point. It costs nothing and takes 90 seconds with a 10mm wrench. It's the single most requested "why does my bike feel different" fix I do, and it's free. And here's the strange part. This exact adjustment is also the #1 fix for clutch drag riders complain about at cold start, because excess cable slack delays full disengagement until the cable stretches slightly with heat. So what feels like a clutch problem is often just a wrench turn away, which makes the next example even more interesting. Number 13. The fork oil weight swap dealers won't suggest because it takes too long to bill. Stock fork oil weight on most touring Harleys is chosen for a soft, cushioned ride that masks harshness on rough pavement but sacrifices control in corners. Swapping to a slightly heavier weight, typically going from a 10 to a 15 or 20 weight depending on model, firms up damping without touching spring rate or ride height. It's a full fork disassembly, which is why shops avoid recommending it. An hour of labor for a $12 bottle of oil isn't profitable for them. For you, it transforms how the front end tracks through sweepers. Honest limitation: go too heavy, and you'll feel it as harshness over sharp bumps and expansion joints. Most riders find their sweet spot exactly one weight class above stock, not two. The same trend appears again. Number 12. The belt tension trick using a fish scale instead of Harley's $40 gauge. Harley sells a proprietary belt tension gauge for around $40 that most independent shops don't even own. You can check final drive belt tension just as accurately with a basic fish scale from a sporting goods store. Hook the scale to the belt at the midpoint between pulleys, pull perpendicular to the belt with 8 to 10 pounds of force, depending on your model year, and measure deflection against Harley's published specification in the service manual. Belts running too tight burn out wheel bearings early, too loose, and they skip under hard acceleration. This $5 tool gets you dealer-accurate readings for a fraction of the price. And here's the strange part most riders miss. Belt tension actually changes slightly as the belt warms up on a ride, so always take your reading cold, first thing, before the bike has moved, or you'll set it to a false specification and chase a phantom problem for weeks. Another example reinforces the same idea. Number 11. The spark plug heat range swap for hot climate riders. Factory spark plugs on Milwaukee 8 engines are gapped and heat ranged for average conditions, which means bikes ridden hard in consistently hot climates or bikes running aftermarket exhaust and a tune can experience mild pre-ignition ping under load. Dropping one heat range colder than stock while keeping the factory gap pulls heat out of the combustion chamber faster and eliminates that ping without touching your ignition timing. It's a swap most riders never consider because the factory plug isn't wrong. It's just tuned for a rider who isn't pushing the engine as hard as you are. Here's another clue. Number 10. The battery tender diode trick that actually extends stator life. Stators on twin cam and early Milwaukee 8 bikes are a known weak point, and constant deep discharge cycles from short rides accelerate their failure. Riders assume a battery tender alone protects the electrical system. It doesn't fully. Adding an inline blocking diode between the tender and the battery prevents any reverse current bleed back through the regulator when the bike sits, which is a slow but real contributor to regulator and stator wear over years of storage. It's a $2 part soldered into your tender's output lead, and it's the difference between a stator lasting 60,000 miles or 90,000. And that's where things become clearer. Number 9. The debaffle trick that doesn't fail a sound test. Removing the baffles entirely for more flow is the loud, obvious move, and it is also the one most likely to attract a noise citation or cause a failed inspection in states that measure exhaust decibel output. The less extreme approach is modifying the factory baffle core rather than gutting the entire system, typically by drilling a controlled pattern of holes through the internal tube. That allows more exhaust flow while retaining much of the original muffling structure, producing a deeper, more aggressive exhaust note without making the bike dramatically louder. The internal chamber still performs some of the sound-absorbing work, so you are not simply turning the exhaust into an open pipe. The trade-off is that even this relatively small modification can affect emissions, noise levels, and the way the engine runs, depending on the motorcycle and its calibration. And it is worth emphasizing that this is still technically an emissions and noise equipment modification, so it may not be legal for street use everywhere. Check your local regulations before altering the factory system. That naturally leads to the next point. Number 8. The ABS module recalibration after a tire size change. Swap to a wider rear tire or different profile, and your speedometer reads wrong, sometimes by 5 miles an hour or more at highway speed, and your ABS threshold calculations go with it, since the module assumes stock rolling circumference. Most riders live with the inaccurate speedo and never think about the ABS side. Harley's diagnostic tool can recalibrate rolling circumference, but so can a handful of aftermarket devices that plug into the diagnostic port under the seat and let you input actual tire circumference directly. It's a 15-minute fix that restores accurate speed reading and, more importantly, correct ABS intervention timing. Here's where the story changes. Number 7. The vacuum petcock cleaning trick for carbureted Evos and twin cams. Older carbureted Harleys use a vacuum-operated petcock that can develop a weak or damaged diaphragm over time, and the resulting fuel restriction can easily be mistaken for a carburetor problem. Under normal riding, the bike may run perfectly well, but under hard acceleration, the engine suddenly begins starving for fuel because the petcock is not opening fully and cannot maintain adequate flow to the carburetor. Before spending money on a carburetor rebuild, inspect the petcock itself. Remove it and check the diaphragm for pinholes or deterioration, paying particular attention to the vacuum side. A leaking diaphragm can prevent the valve from operating correctly and create symptoms that look almost identical to a fuel delivery or carburation fault. If the diaphragm is damaged, a relatively inexpensive replacement kit can often restore proper operation without touching the carburetor at all. That is why this small component is worth checking before authorizing a much larger repair. A roughly $40 diaphragm kit can potentially fix a fuel starvation problem that a shop might otherwise diagnose as a $200 carburetor rebuild. Now consider another example. Number 6. The switch pod contact cleaner trick for intermittent electrical gremlins. Handlebar switch pods on Harleys corrode internally from years of rain and washing, causing intermittent turn signal, horn, or starter button failures that seem to come and go randomly. The classic gremlin every rider dreads. Before replacing an entire switch pod assembly, which runs well over $100, pull the pod apart and hit every contact point with electrical contact cleaner and a pencil eraser to lightly burnish the corrosion off the copper contacts. This resolves the majority of random electrical faults riders bring in, and it costs about $6 in contact cleaner. The next one deserves a closer look. Number 5. The ignition module timing advance trick. Stock ignition timing curves on carbureted Harleys are generally calibrated conservatively to cope with a wide range of fuel quality, riding conditions, and maintenance states. That conservative approach gives the engine a safety margin, but it can also leave some throttle response on the table for a properly maintained motorcycle running the correct fuel and a correctly jetted carburetor. Aftermarket ignition modules can allow riders to select a more aggressive advance curve, changing how quickly ignition timing advances as engine speed and load change. On a well-maintained engine that is already getting the right amount of fuel, the result can be noticeably sharper throttle response, particularly when rolling on the throttle from low RPM. But there is an important caveat here. Ignition timing and fueling have to work together. If the engine is running lean, poorly jetted, or otherwise not properly fueled, adding aggressive timing can increase cylinder pressure and combustion temperatures enough to trigger detonation. That can cause serious damage to pistons and other internal components. So this is not a modification to use as a shortcut for fixing a poorly running bike. Get the fueling right. First, make sure the engine is healthy, and only then consider changing the ignition curve. And then there is this one. Number 4. The primary chain adjustment most riders do backwards. Primary chain tension gets checked at the wrong point in the rotation constantly because chains don't wear evenly, and there's a tight spot and a loose spot every revolution. Checking tension at just one random position gives you a false reading. The correct method is to rotate the rear wheel through a full revolution while checking deflection at the tightest point in the chain's travel, then set tension based on that tightest point, not an average. Set it wrong, and you either starve the chain of proper lubrication clearance or run it dangerously loose under load. This single correction is why some riders get 20,000 extra miles out of a primary chain that others burn through in 12,000. Now things start to change. Number 3. The Stator output test using a $9 multimeter instead of a dealer's $500 diagnostic rig. Charging system problems get diagnosed as bad Stator, replace everything, far too often, when the real issue is sometimes just a corroded connector. With the bike running at a steady 2,000 RPM, backprobe the Stator's AC output leads with a basic multimeter set to AC voltage. You should see somewhere around 20 volts AC per 1,000 RPM depending on your model. Readings well below that with clean connections confirm a genuinely failing Stator. Readings that jump around erratically usually point to a corroded connector, not a dead stator, and that's an $8 fix instead of a $300 part. Now watch what happens next. Number 2. The throttle body sync trick for twin-bore Milwaukee 8 touring models. Riders assume fuel injection means nothing needs syncing the way carburetors did, and that's mostly true, except the idle air control passages can develop uneven flow over time from carbon buildup, causing a subtle surge or hunt at idle that a fuel-only cleaning won't fix. cleaning the idle air passage with throttle body cleaner and a soft brush, not carb cleaner, which is too aggressive for the coated bore, restores even airflow distribution and eliminates a hunting idle that riders often mistake for a bad idle air control motor. And that leads us directly to the next example. Number 1. Full stage 1 airflow, exhaust, and tune combination done in the correct order. This is the one that actually moves the needle, and it's also the one riders get wrong constantly by doing it out of sequence. Installing an open air cleaner and a less restrictive exhaust without immediately following it with a proper fuel retune leaves the engine running dangerously lean. And a lean-running air-cooled V-twin underload is how you crack cylinder heads and burn exhaust valves. Done correctly, in the right order, air cleaner and exhaust installed first, then a dyno-verified fuel and timing retune to match the new airflow. This combination typically delivers the largest single power gain on this entire list, commonly in the 15 to 20% range at the rear wheel on a stock Milwaukee 8. Done out of order, it's the fastest way to a 5-figure engine rebuild. Sequence is everything here. Want to keep learning with us? Subscribe and don't miss the next episode.